The Collected Short Stories of Ambrose Bierce, a compilation of short fiction by a master of the craft containing some pretty remarkable works. So, on the off chance you are unfamiliar with Ambrose Bierce, Ambrose Bierce was an American author, journalist, and Civil War veteran who is regarded, and not without good reason, for being among the finest writers of short fiction the United States has ever produced. And this book is a compendium of, I'm assuming, all of his short stories. And like I say, this contains some pretty remarkable works. So the contents of the collected short stories of Ambrose Bierce can kind of be divided into like three categories. You have war stories, then you have like paranormal stories, and then you have miscellaneous other stories, a lot of which actually kind of fall into the category of like absurdist comedy. But, to talk about this book, I can't really like summarize all of its contents because there's like dozens and dozens of stories in here. But I will just kind of touch broadly on the different categories that I have enumerated that roughly comprise this collection. So the war stories in this book are very, very well done and memorable for the most part, and that is due probably to the fact that Ambrose Bierce himself was a veteran of the American Civil War, which these stories, the war stories, I mean, revolve around generally. And one thing that you'll note about the war fiction of Ambrose Bierce is that it can be kind of uh, edgy, given the time period in which it was written. At least, like, you know, in olden days, I suppose fiction was kind of censored to a degree. Like there were lines that you generally didn't cross, for the longest time. But Bierce really did kind of cross the line a little bit, at least in some of these stories, because he was not averse to depicting violence very graphically, again, for the time. And also, he was not averse to depicting quite graphic violence against women and children, which again is kind of anomalous for the time that these stories were written. It's kind of striking, honestly, the level of gore that is in some of these stories, because it was just kind of more raw and unfiltered than I think most of the fiction, even most of the war fiction from that era was. So it was kind of pushing boundaries in some ways, I would say. Now, on to the paranormal stories. These stories are also quite memorable in some ways because Ambrose Bierce actually prefigured later, like, weird fiction uh, authors and like science fiction slash horror authors such as like H.P. Lovecraft. And some of these stories are actually kind of ahead of the curve in some ways in their content. There are certain stories in here that once again kind of prefigure later developments in the genre. And he was quite a good teller of ghost stories as well, because the a lot of these stories are like about haunted houses and ghosts and stuff, but it's really well done and it's really well suited to the short fiction format. Like kind of like campfire ghost stories, but like he really does kind of get a lot out of this format. He's able to get in, tell his tale very quickly, very succinctly, but he gets that little punch out of it, that kind of chill up the spine out of it that you would want out of a good ghost story, right? So his paranormal fiction is also quite remarkable as well. Now on to the other kind of just miscellaneous stories, a lot of which, as I said, can be classified as like absurdist comedy. These are definitely the least impressive out of this collection, but they are also kind of notable for being a little bit transgressive for the time period. They're kind of irreverent in some ways. There's a real wit to these stories, and not just the other miscellaneous stories, but like to all of these stories, there's a real biting wit to them. But in these kind of like absurdist comedy stories that he writes, they're pretty irreverent. And again, it's nothing like that will make you blush or anything. But there are some things in some of these stories that I was kind of like, wow, I'm surprised that that got published given the time period in which it was published. Again, it was kind of uh, pushing taboos just a little bit, perhaps. But yeah, those stories are kind of just the least impressive, the ones that I enjoyed the least out of this collection. But they were still, if you're into that kind of thing, they were still pretty well done, I would say. And, to speak upon the technical qualities of these stories, they're all pretty much roundly, fantastically written. The writing in these stories is roundly excellent. There's such an economy of words, and yet nothing feels shortchanged. It all comes together remarkably well. And it just illustrates that Bierce was truly a master of the short story. The character work is, not that deep because of the short fiction format again, but he kind of circumvents that, or at least he kind of shores up the weaknesses by his voice, because the voice in these stories is so sardonic, so witty, and often so biting. And again, just as to like the subject matter of these stories, it's varied, but he was definitely not a one trick pony. He could tell stories of a variety of genres about a variety of things and do it quite well. And he definitely earned his spurs, I will say, as one of the preeminent writers of short fiction in United States history. But to just talk about kind of what unites these stories, it is, again, kind of the tone of them, because these are very American stories. And, you know, it these stories not only are like about America, about American things like the Civil War and stuff like that, but like just the voice with which they're told. It feels like, I mean, it just feels kind of, it has this kind of Western tinge to it. This again, sardonic, Western tinged kind of wit to it. It's definitely, this is like the American tradition of literature, and it is like exemplified marvelously with these stories, because the telling of these stories, the tone in which they are related, is just like pitch perfect. It really is. So, like I say, I can't really go through the book and talk about everything, but I would like to just kind of go through the table of contents here, and highlight some of my favorite stories from the collection, some of the stories that had the biggest impact on me. And starting out, we have literally the first story in the collection, which is A Horseman in the Sky. And that is also one of the greatest stories that Ambrose Bierce ever told, because it is probably one of the finest short stories I have ever personally read. It is just so perfect. Like, I can't really describe that story as anything other than just being perfect. It's one of the war stories, but it's told with such precision, such an economy of words, and yet the effect of the story when you get to the end, it's like a gut punch. It really is. I did not really see what was coming with this story. I didn't anticipate any kind of twist with the ending, but damn was I surprised. And like, A Horseman in the Sky is truly one of the finest short stories, the finest like single short individual short stories I have ever read. It is truly that good. And then we have, after that, probably one of the most frequently anthologized and perennially acclaimed short stories in American history, and that is the iconic An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. A story which takes the whole trope of it was all a dream, but does it really well. And it is also one of the most influential short stories, I think, because if you look like in popular culture, you can kind of see similar twists in various different other narratives that this story was doing a long time ago. If you've never read An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, like that would be the one I would say that, like if you've never read any of Ambrose Bierce's stories, that would be the one that I would recommend because it's definitely his most famous, his most iconic, and also just one of his best. And then after that, we have The Eyes of the Panther. And that one is unique because if I'm interpreting it correctly, and again, perhaps there's a certain element of ambiguity to it where you can interpret it in different ways, but if I am interpreting that story correctly, it's sort of like a werewolf or were panther story. It's kind of like that movie Cat People. It's kind of like that. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if that movie didn't draw some kind of inspiration from that story. Once more, if I'm interpreting it correctly, that one was pretty striking. And then we have one of the ghost stories. We have The Death of Halpin Fraser, which is also a really great example of a ghost story and kind of a mystery story as well. And again, I think you can interpret that story in different ways. It may be perhaps kind of a multiple choice as regards what ultimately happens in the story. It may be kind of multiple choice, but that one was really, really good. And then we have the story Moxon's Master. And this one is, as I alluded to earlier, an example of a story which I think was ahead of the curve, ahead of its time, because this is a story, probably one of the earliest stories concerning what we would now call a robot, a robot rebelling against its maker and killing its maker, like very Terminator type vibes. Now, the funny thing is that at the time that this story was written, machinery was still pretty simple. Like we didn't have digital machinery at all. The most advanced type of like what you would call like automaton would be like that thing called the Turk, right? The machine that plays chess, kind of like the things that you see at like carnivals or whatnot. The fortune telling machine where you put a coin in and then the gypsy lady, whatever, will turn a card or whatever. It's kind of like that. But because there's no like potential for what you would call artificial intelligence in this story, the way that Bierce depicts the machine gaining sentience is very interesting. And it's also very interesting if you're like have a flair for the philosophical, in particular if you are intrigued by notions of like panpsychism. Once again, Moxon's Master is a story that was definitely ahead of the curve, definitely ahead of its time. And again, the way that Bierce accounts for the gaining of sentience by a machine, it's very intriguing. And again, I really love that one. And then we have a story called A Psychological Shipwreck. And that one I really liked a lot. It also kind of has it kind of has to do with that twist of it was all a dream, but it's done remarkably well and it feels very like it feels kind of yeah I can liken it to that old like Chinese koan, the emperor in the dream of the butterfly, right? If you've ever heard of that, where the emperor dreams that he was a butterfly dreaming that he was the emperor. And it's a story that questions what actually is real. Is the emperor dreaming that he is the butterfly, or is it the butterfly dreaming that he is an emperor? That story, A Psychological Shipwreck, it's kind of like that. It's kind of like a split reality, and it makes you question which one is actually real, or are they both real? That was a really great story, I have to say. Then we have the story The Damned Thing, and that is definitely like a precursor to like later kind of weird fiction horror stories. Like you can feel some Lovecraft in that. It's about a man who is bedeviled by an invisible monster, and like he can really get some miles out of that. You can the way that the monster is depicted, or not directly depicted because it's never shown because you can't see it, but you can kind of see its effects. That was really good. That was a really, like, again, kind of very like progressive, forward thinking kind of story that foreshadows later developments in that genre. Really great story there. And then we have the story An Inhabitant of Carcosa. Now, as I said, a lot of what Bierce does in these stories kind of, again, prefigures later, like weird fiction, like weird horror fiction by the likes of H.P. Lovecraft. And that one, perhaps more prominently than any others, because the name Carcosa was later appropriated by the writer Robert W. Chambers for his book The King in Yellow, which it was also appropriated from that by Nick Pizzolatto, the writer of True Detective. And if you've seen that first season of True Detective, you'll be familiar with the name Carcosa. But this is actually where it originated from, the short story by Ambrose Bierce, An Inhabitant of Carcosa. Great story there. I love that one. And then we have a collection of a few kind of related stories under the heading Mysterious Disappearances. And these stories are about, mysterious disappearances if it wasn't given away. They're about people that disappear in like paranormal fashion. They're really pretty good as well. I like some of those because some of those feel like, like urban legends, like stuff that you would hear that happened that can't be confirmed, right? Unconfirmed kind of supernatural happenings. That those were also pretty good. And then we have the other stories, a lot of which, like I said, are like absurdist comedies. Those are like, amusing kind of, but that's definitely kind of the weaker. Those are the weaker stories out of this collection, I would say. But yeah, the collected short stories of Ambrose Bierce. This is just by and large like one of the best compendiums of short fiction by a single writer that you're likely to ever encounter. I think the only example that I could say that like surpasses this would probably be like Borges, the collected fictions of Jorge Luis Borges. That still probably takes the cake as like the best short fiction collection I've ever read. But Ambrose Bierce's work is probably bringing up second place as of right now. I thoroughly enjoyed so many of these stories. A lot of them are like really really good, very memorable works. So to rate this book overall, I guess I'll just kind of give it an average rating. Taking all the contents into account, I think I would give it a good solid B plus. It has some very memorable, very striking moments. Again, some of the kind of miscellaneous stories are a little bit goofy sometimes, and maybe not as strong in comparison to the war stories and the paranormal stories. But those war stories and those paranormal stories are, again, just fantastic, and I just love the heck out of most of them. So yeah, B plus is what I'm feeling. So the collected short stories of Ambrose Bierce. Have you read any or all of these stories? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about them. And if you haven't read any or all of the works of Ambrose Bierce, I could definitely recommend picking up or seeking out at least some of his short stories. Again, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge and A Horseman in the Sky probably foremost, because those are like truly like probably two of the greatest short stories in American history. So I would say definitely read those if none others. But yeah, you might want to pick this up, like this full complete collection, if you are a fan of short stories, if you like short fiction, because this is some really strong work here. And it's, some of the best short fiction that the United States has probably ever produced. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.